Hello and welcome to $5 Hockey Mask. If you've been here before, welcome back. Iceberg videos are still relevant apparently, so I decided to make one on a subject I'm somewhat familiar with. The country I live in. This intro's gonna be a little long. If you want to just get to the iceberg, here's a timestamp. No, when I said I made the iceberg, I meant I made this image that I'm using. I didn't come up with any of the entries. I took these 3 charts from Reddit and just combined them into one in a way that sort of works. They all had different numbers of tiers, so I couldn't just superimpose them onto each other. I had to move some entries around or combine them together, but I think I did a decent job without messing too much with the original charts. But yeah, other than that, credit goes to the OPs. As our Canadian YouTuber God King JJ McCullough mentioned in this video, Americans tend to be innocently oblivious to the stuff that happens in Canada, while we Canadians are maliciously well informed of American affairs, sometimes to the point that we end up knowing more about American politics, history, and culture than we do about our own. This series sort of serves as a test to that theory. Any Americans watching can test how unaware they are of the true North strong and free, and my fellow Canadians can see how much they missed out on while they were busy smugly copy-pasting school shooting statistics into Instagram comment sections. Anyone else, you can test your knowledge too, I guess. Also, just a quick content warning. It's an iceberg video, I don't know what you're expecting, but some of this stuff does get pretty heavy, so viewer discretion. Also, since this chart is ordered more based on obscurity than how disturbing the entries are, it gets real dark real fast. I'm talking dead kids in tier 2, so just be ready for that. Alright, disclaimers out of the way, I'll get onto the iceberg. Starting tier 1 off is bilingualism, which refers to the fact that Canada has 2 official languages, English and French. You already know I speak one of them, mais en fait, je parle français aussi. Bien que c'est supposé d'être une langue nationale, le français est seulement reconnu au niveau provincial dans 2 provinces, et c'est vraiment seulement parlé dans le sud-est du pays. Okay, I'm done. But government correspondence and things like food labels legally have to be written in both languages no matter where you are, though road signs don't for some reason. You'd think that'd be an important one, but apparently not. Also, French Canadians living in English-speaking areas have a constitutional right to have a French school set up in their community if enough French-speaking people live there. Now, that cuts both ways. If you're an Anglophone in a French-majority region, you also have a right to an English school, but chances are, if you're using that clause, you're a French speaker. Universal healthcare refers to the type of socialized healthcare system Canada has, where medical facilities are government-funded instead of being fully privatized like they are in other places. A lot of people will tell you that this means Canadian healthcare is free, but that's not actually true. It's not free, it's just prepaid through extra taxes. When you pay your taxes, you pay into a pool that your medical costs are then taken out of if you get treatment. It's free at the point of delivery, you don't get a hospital bill like in America, but you still technically pay for it. Hockey is, as you're probably aware, a very popular sport here in Canada. Even if you're like me and don't follow sports at all, you probably still know how to play and are at least familiar with big teams like the Leafs, Habs, Canucks, and Oilers. This collective obsession makes sense, since hockey is one of Canada's 2 national sports. The other one's lacrosse, by the way, in case you were wondering. Maple syrup is a very common food topping, I guess, and pretty much a national symbol of Canada at this point. It's probably one of the first 3 things non-Canadians think of when they hear Canada, and that's not for no reason. For one, the leaf of the tree it comes from is on our flag, meaning of all the things we could have picked to represent Canada on the international scale, we went with maple trees, and by association, maple syrup. Now, the syrup itself is also part of it, since between 75 and 85% of the world's maple syrup supply comes from Canada. So, yeah, not that hard to see where the association comes from. Mounties is a colloquial name for officers of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, which is basically Canada's national police department. It's similar to agencies like the FBI in the sense that it enforces federal laws, but unlike the FBI, its authority isn't limited to that. A federal crime doesn't have to be committed for the RCMP to get involved, but that's generally what they're responsible for. Anyway, the Mounties are best known outside of Canada for their red uniforms, Stetson hats, and, as the name implies, riding on horseback. That stuff's mostly ceremonial, though. They are still a federal police force. If they're responding to a terrorist threat or working security for a government official, they won't be doing it with the funny hats on. Poutine is a famous Canadian food originating in the province of Quebec. It's pretty much just a plate of fries topped with cheese curds and gravy, but it's unironically really good if it's made right. That's the catch. It's a very easy meal to mess up. If the gravy's too runny or the fries are undercooked, it gets all soggy and gross. But if you make it right, it's good. And if you still don't like it then, yes you do. Blaspheming our gravy fries is a capital offense. We will feed you to the geese. Tim Hortons is a popular Canadian restaurant chain co-founded by and named after hockey player Tim Horton in 1964. It's so popular, in fact, that it's Canada's biggest fast food chain, though its locations are mostly concentrated in the southeast. And I mean concentrated. You can go to some parts of southern Ontario and always be within walking distance of a Tim's. They are everywhere. As for the restaurant's quality, it's not bad for fast food, but I don't want to give them too much praise since they got rid of the old Timbit box, a decision for which I will never forgive them. Wayne Gretzky, aka the Great One, is a famous Canadian hockey player generally regarded as the best in the sport's history. He played under the number 99 for the Edmonton Oilers and a few US teams from 1979 until his retirement in 1999. At the time of his retirement, more than 20 years ago, his goal, point, and assist stats were higher than anyone's in the NHL today, as of time of recording. It's not hard to see where he got his nickname from. Second largest country refers to the fact that Canada is the second largest country in the world by land area, between Russia in first and China in third. Not a whole lot to say here. Justin Bieber is a Canadian-born pop star who was big in the 2010s and is still pretty popular now. He's best known for songs like Baby, Sorry, and that one feature he did with the Kid Laroi. Don't worry, I don't like his music either, you can put down your pitchforks. Celine Dion is a famous French-Canadian singer who was big in the 90s. She's currently the single best-selling French-language artist in the world, though she's ironically best known for her English song, My Heart Will Go On, which served as the theme for James Cameron's Titanic movie. Rush is a fairly well-known Canadian rock band that was big in the 70s and 80s, made up of guitarist Alex Lifeson, drummer Neil Peart, and bassist/keyboardist/vocalist Geddy Lee. They're best known for songs like Tom Sawyer, The Spirit of Radio, and certified hood classic Working Man. Well, they call me the Working Man. I guess that's what I am. Total Drama is a pretty popular Canadian cartoon that first aired in 2007. It's sort of an animated mockumentary, satirizing those survival reality shows you'd see on TV all the time. I'll confess that I never actually watched this as a kid, but I've heard it's good, so take that how you will. Letterkenny is a Canadian sitcom that first aired in 2016, based on a 2013 YouTube series called Letterkenny Problems. The show centers around the residents of the titular rural Ontario town, and is apparently very funny. I'll also confess that I haven't seen this one either, but I've been meaning to, if that helps. Seal clubbing controversy refers to the controversy surrounding the use of clubs as weapons by Canadian seal hunters. The outcry is mostly around commercial hunting operations on the East Coast, which are solely for collecting seal pelts to sell, but also has implications for Inuit hunters in the Nunavut territory, who hunt seals for food alongside selling the pelts. It's fairly common for both commercial and subsistence hunters in Canada to use blunt clubs as weapons while hunting, since it helps save bullets and doesn't break the skin, which makes the pelt more useful since it doesn't end up with holes in it. Seal hunters have been pretty widely condemned for using this tactic, since it's seen as cruel and inhumane for pretty obvious reasons. The government also catches some flack for it, since it not only allows, but actively condones the practice by specifically authorizing it through its hunting practices. So yeah, if you've ever heard someone call Canadian seal clubbers derogatorily, now you know where it comes from. Quebec independence refers to the active independence movement that exists in Quebec. See, the cultural identity of the Quebecois people has been historically distinct from the rest of Canada, going back to the early days of European settlement. What is now Quebec was largely colonized by French settlers, while the rest of the country's colonists mostly came from the British Isles. The descendants of both populations developed their own distinct identities over time, and when the Quebecois eventually found themselves in an Anglophone majority country that they felt wasn't accommodating enough for their unique language and customs, some decided they didn't feel like staying. Movements for Quebec to secede from the Federation and form a self-governing state gained traction around the province, which led to some incidents I'll get into later in the Iceberg. The independence movement has died down a decent amount, but is still going relatively strong today, with the separatist Bloc Québécois being Quebec's second biggest political party and the fourth biggest nationally as of 2021. Niagara Falls is a famous system of waterfalls located on the US-Canada border. I'd thought for a long time that the falls were the biggest in the world, but that's not actually true. We're not even in the top 5. They're actually just the 7th biggest in the world. But they're the 3rd biggest in the Western Hemisphere and the single biggest in the continent of North America, which is still impressive, but not as much. Well, as impressive as a natural phenomenon that happens to exist on our side of the border can be. Legalized euthanasia refers to the fact that Canadians with certain medical conditions have been legally allowed to have their plugs pulled, so to speak, since 2016. If you've seen those memes comparing healthcare systems where the American gets a $50,000 bill, the Brit has to wait 3 years, and the Canadian gets told to kill himself, this is where that comes from. This procedure, known by its government doublespeak name of Medical Assistance in Dying, or MAID, has been controversial since before it was even legalized, and has not gotten any better in the years since. See, the original 2016 law only allowed MAID in cases where the patient had a terminal illness, which, as dark as it is, makes sense. But the law was amended in 2021 to remove that stipulation, making it applicable to anyone with a severe medical condition, fatal or not. The change itself wasn't necessarily the controversial part, though. That came later, with reports of people with otherwise manageable conditions applying for and receiving MAID because they were just suicidal or couldn't afford their long-term care and accommodations. Then, more recently, it was announced that the law would be expanded to include mental illness as grounds to receive MAID. The outcry at this change was more direct, since it raised obvious concerns of informed consent. These concerns seem to have been taken into account, though, since the implementation of this part of the policy has been delayed until at least 2027. SNC-Lavalin refers to the SNC-Lavalin affair, one of the many scandals of Justin Trudeau's premiership. In 2015, SNC-Lavalin, a Quebec-based engineering firm, was charged with corruption for allegedly bribing the Libyan government $48 million to do business with them. Trudeau comes into the story 4 years later, when he was accused of pressuring the at-the-time Attorney General into intervening in the case to prevent the company from being prosecuted, and then removing her from her position when she refused. Trudeau denied the allegations, saying that though he had discussed the case with her, he never tried to influence her decision, and that her reassignment to Veterans Affairs Minister had nothing to do with it. But a report from the Ethics Commissioner later that year found that he and his staff had in fact tried to illegally influence the Attorney General. The scandal led to the resignation of several government officials and a response from Trudeau, where he said he took responsibility for his mistakes but wouldn't apologize for them, since he did what he did to protect the company's employees. Which, yeah, a lot of people would have lost their jobs, but this is literally Arrested Development in real life. $50 million were allegedly funneled illegally into one of this century's worst dictatorships. You can't just do nothing about that. The PPC, or People's Party of Canada, is a somewhat prominent right-wing political party, being the 6th biggest party in Canada as of 2021. It was founded by former Conservative Party member Maxime Bernier after he left the CPC in 2018 over disagreements with the leadership, and has won a combined total of 0 seats in the election since. It's easily the farthest right of the mainstream parties, with much more hardline positions on things like immigration, gun ownership, and gender identity than the Conservatives, which is to be expected from the guy who started his own populist party because he thought the conservatives weren't conservative enough. We scandal refers to the We Charity scandal, another of Trudeau Jr.'s political controversies. In 2020, the government introduced the Canada Student Service Grant, a program to help post-secondary students make money when everything was under lockdown. You could basically get paid for doing volunteer work if you couldn't find a summer job. Now, the scandal didn't come out of the program itself, it was who Trudeau picked to manage it that became a problem for him. See, the government announced that the We Charity was hired to hand the money out, which was not a great look for Trudeau and the at-the-time finance minister, since it came out that they both had personal and/or family ties to the nonprofit. Accusations of a conflict of interest started popping up, and the finance minister resigned shortly after the news broke, but claimed it had nothing to do with the allegations. The ethics commissioner then started an investigation, leading to 5,000 pages of documents related to the case being released. It later turned out that these documents had more unnecessary redactions than a Series 1 SCP article, and Trudeau dissolved Parliament on the same day they were made public. This did not help his case, since it not only made it look like he was withholding information, but also dodging confrontation about it after. But, despite all that, the ethics commissioner ultimately cleared Trudeau of wrongdoing, but found the former finance minister guilty of ethics breaches. Caillou is a very divisive Canadian kids cartoon that first aired in 1997. It's a quote-unquote educational show based on a book series of the same name, and centers around the titular 4-year-old being a whiny brat baby and getting away with everything. Fun fact, Caillou is actually the French word for pebble, which is pretty fitting, since, like a pebble, he is small, annoying, and painful in large quantities. This channel is not a safe space for the Caillou community. All my homies hate Caillou. I'll confess that I did actually watch this as a kid, but not for very long, since my parents put a stop to it pretty quick, if you couldn't tell. Residential schools refers to the Indian residential school system, which is a very complicated and contentious subject that I can't cover properly in this Iceberg format, so a lot of important details are getting left out here. The program officially ran from the 1880s until 1996, and was part of a government effort to provide education to Canada's Indigenous peoples. As part of the program, Indigenous children would be separated from their families, sometimes forcibly at the age of 5, and sent to state-run church schools where they would live until their graduation at 15. It wasn't common practice to let the kids leave the school for holiday breaks until the 1960s, meaning many would go the full 10 years without seeing their families. If that wasn't bad enough, education wasn't the only goal of the program. The schools were also meant to assimilate the kids into Canadian society. Not integrate, assimilate. The system wasn't there to add Canadian values and practices onto the kids'. It was explicitly meant to replace them. Along with the standard curriculum, the kids were taught a national language and converted to Christianity, while their native languages and religions were suppressed. And that's all how it was supposed to work on paper. In practice, the system was chronically underfunded and the staff were barely trained, which led to prevalent abuse, the actual education part of the system not even being adequate a lot of the time, malnourishment and disease outbreaks, and forced student labor to supplement low budgets. An estimated 150,000 Indigenous children were sent to these schools, between 3,200 and 6,000 of whom died during their stay as a result of these conditions. The government later officially investigated the system and formally apologized for its involvement in 2008. On a more light-hearted note, Justin Trudeau as Castro's son refers to a semi-ironic conspiracy theory that the Prime Minister's mom had an affair with former Cuban President Fidel Castro in 1971, of which Justin was the result. The theory mostly comes from the fact that Trudeau's parents were associates of Castro's and that he just looks a lot like him. There are a lot of ways to disprove the theory, but the easiest one is just that neither of Justin's parents had met Castro in person until Justin was already 5 years old. So, unless the Soviets snuck a time machine in with their nuke shipments, there's no way this infidelity with Fidel could have happened. Now, like I said, this isn't a very serious theory. Most people who say they believe it are just joking since they don't like Trudeau and want to laugh at the idea that he's the bastard son of a Caribbean dictator. But it also has some more unironic supporters who genuinely believe it's true and use it as proof that Justin is secretly a doctrinal communist, hell-bent on turning Canada into a Soviet-style autocracy like his real dad did in Cuba. I haven't taken biology since grade 10. Which chromosome carries communist sympathy again? Highway of Tears is the name given to a section of Highway 16 in central British Columbia, where a confirmed 18 people, mostly Indigenous women, have gone missing or have been murdered since 1969, though unofficial numbers go as high as 40. So what's the deal with this section of this road? Why have so many people died or disappeared there? Well, there's a few things. To start, it's a very empty stretch of road that few people use and has little police presence, which is great if you want to avoid traffic or speed without getting caught, but less so if you're being kidnapped or killed with no witnesses. The area didn't have full cell coverage until 2021, too, so if something happened to you, you'd be out of luck calling for help. It also runs through a particularly poor and isolated area of BC that had no public transit system until 2017. So if you needed to get out of town and couldn't afford to drive, your best bet would have been to hitchhike. So you've got an empty road in the middle of nowhere with, until very recently, no cell reception, frequented by hitchhikers. If I didn't tell you it was real, you'd think this was the setup to a slasher movie. Face in St. Paul's Church refers to the so-called explosion window of St. Paul's Church in Halifax, Nova Scotia. In 1917, a munition ship crashed off the coast of Halifax, creating the biggest pre-nuclear man-made explosion in human history. Yeah, people don't really know about that. Much of the city was leveled by the blast, but the church was far enough away that only its windows were shattered by the force. The explosion window was one of them, but what's special about it is that it broke in a way that kind of looks like the side profile of a man's head. There are a few local legends around why the hole is shaped like that, the most popular one being that the severed head of a sailor from the ship was launched into the window, leaving a perfect outline of his head in the glass. Another says the same thing happened, but to an organist in the church, whose head was sliced off by glass shards and sent through the window from the inside. I'm gonna assume you know how glass works, so I won't explain why that makes no sense. Babes in the Woods murders refers to a case from 1953, where two young boys were found murdered in a park in Vancouver, BC. They had both been beaten to death with the blunt end of an axe, and their bodies were hidden under a coat covered in leaves. No one at the time could figure out who they were or who did this to them, and it stayed that way until 2022, almost 70 years after their bodies were discovered. The boys were finally identified through DNA analysis as 6-year-old David and 7-year-old Derek Dalton, two brothers from a poor family in western Vancouver. Even though the victims in the case have finally been named, we still haven't figured out who killed them. But, given their family's financial status and the fact that they were never reported missing, it was most likely a close family member. William Robinson murder refers to one in a string of 3 murders that took place on Salt Spring Island, BC in the 1860s. The murders all targeted black settlers on the island, and only one was officially solved, that of a Sunday school teacher named William Robinson. Robinson was found shot to death in his house in 1868, and a local indigenous man named Shuanahuset was found guilty of his murder and executed by hanging the next year. But there's a lot of doubt around whether this guy actually killed Robinson. The witness testimony his conviction was based on included a statement from a local settler who claimed another indigenous man who he couldn't name had told him Shuanahuset was the killer. That is the most clear-cut case of hearsay I've ever seen, but the court accepted it anyway. This was 150 years before the Depp trial, though, so maybe people just didn't take it as seriously back then. The supposed physical evidence against him was also very sketchy. An axe and an auger that Shuanahuset allegedly stole from Robinson after the shooting were used to prove his guilt, but Shuanahuset's brother testified that the axe was actually his, not William's. As for the auger, no one could identify it as anyone's since it was lost in a lake before the trial started, so we don't even know if it existed or not. There isn't really an alternative suspect in this case that I could find, though, so as shaky as it is, Chuanahusit's still our best guess as to who actually killed him. Alright, that's it for part 1 of the Iceberg. Hit the like if you like it, hit the dislike if you don't. Part 2's coming soon, so subscribe to see it when it does. But until then, I'm out.